It's Captain Ron with Red Chaser Guide Service. Welcome back to School of Redfish. Today, we're going to be talking about redfish leaders, and I'm going to show you the leader system that I like to use in my fishing. Now, leaders is one of those things that there's a lot of opinions about, and people have strong opinions about in fishing. I'm going to show you what works well for me, tell you why I tie it the way I do. Um, First thing I want to say is that a lot of people will use store-bought extruded leaders. That's fine. Some people will use what's called a bubble leader, just a straight piece of 40-pound test or something to tie off to their fly. I don't. I use a progressive step down leader. I tie my own, but I have a heavy butt section, an intermediate section, and then a class tippet. And I use class tippet of 20-pound or less for a couple of reasons. One is for tradition. When I started fly fishing, it was because I wanted to seek out additional challenges. I had caught plenty of fish. I wanted to move on to the next thing that was going to require more skill of me and teach me more skills and refine my skill sets. And so I picked fly fishing. And since I was getting into fly fishing for additional challenges, I wanted to embrace all the things that were traditional about fly fishing to fully embrace that challenge. And for me, that includes fishing with somewhat lighter lines and lighter tackle. The IGFA, in their rules for records for fly fishing, they mandate that you have a section of class tippet of 20-pound test or less that's at least 15 inches long between the knots. And I tie my leaders IGFA compliant. Not that I'm ever going to kill a fish for a record or that I'm ever going to record hunt, but just to challenge myself. That's me. Additionally, though, there's a practical end to me wanting to have that class tippet section in there. And that is because in Louisiana, we have started having a lot of shark issues. Last season, we really had a lot of issues, tons of sharks in the marsh, particularly lemon sharks. I've had clients lose big fish to sharks that they were fighting, or lose fish they were fighting to sharks. And I'm talking big redfish. I've also seen sharks, big sharks, bite a redfish in half, and then smaller sharks move in and start picking over the half that the big shark didn't eat. Had other fish hit by sharks in a lot of incidents. So I want to have the ability to break a fish off if I need to, if a shark comes into the picture. And by having that lighter class tippet on there, we can do that. You can either point your rod straight at the fish and pull straight back, or you can get your hand on the line in front of the rod and pull against the fish and hopefully break them off and give them a chance against the shark. If you happen to be fighting a great big redfish and the fish starts jumping out the water, there's probably a shark on it because redfish don't jump. So the leaders I tie, I call turnover leaders. I tie them so that they can turn over my heavy weighted redfish flies. The majority of my flies have 1/30th ounce dumbbell eyes on them. And so I want to use a heavy butt section. I want butt section to make up the majority of the leader, but I still want it to taper down so that I could turn a fly off over softly enough if I'm throwing at a somewhat spooky crawler or something of that nature. For leader material, I simply use Ande monofilament. It works great for me. It's stiff enough to make a decent leader, but supple enough to give you a decent presentation. At the same time, it knots very well. I'm extremely confident of my knots in Ande monofilament. And while I've been using this stuff for about 30 years, in the last year or so, I actually saw the Salt Strong guys doing some testing of different leader materials and tippet materials. And they ended up ranking this as one of the best materials because they found that it had really high abrasion resistance. So I'm going to start with 60-pound Ande for my butt section. First thing I'll do is I'll tie a little perfection loop in the back end. So I'm going to tell you about what knots I'm tying. I'm not going to step by step the knots themselves because I think there's far better directions online than what I would be able to provide you. And you could search out the individual knots. I'm using a perfection loop. I'm going to use a blood knot and an improved blood knot. So that's all the knots you need. So I'll tie the loop. I do use the welded loops on fly line for redfish. Then for the length of it, I'm not the tallest guy in the world with the biggest wingspan. My wingspan's about 5 feet. So I'm going to measure my wingspan and then back up just a little bit. So I'm going to end up with a butt section that's maybe just a little bit over 4.5 feet. So there's my 60-pound butt, my intermediate section, 40-pound Ande monofilament. And I'm just going to tie this in with a regular blood knot. I don't use an improved blood knot here because with 40 and 60-pound, even if it's a poorly tied knot, it's still going to be stronger than my class tippet. So doing that blood knot of the 40 to the 60. And when I'm doing blood knots, always wet them very well. All right, and snug it up. They've got a good blood knot with opposing tag ends. So I trim the tags. And I'm going to want my 40-pound intermediate section to be a little bit less than half the length of the butt section. So I take my butt section, fold it over, and I can measure the intermediate section against that to get half the length, and then just back up a couple of inches. Now I'm going to use 15-pound Ande Mano. I'm catching fish well in excess of 30 pounds on 15-pound. And I'm going to tell you a little secret about that. People worry about, oh, that may not be heavy enough for those big fish. If you're fishing an 8 or 9 weight fly rod, if you're fighting a fish and you have any bend at all in that rod, you can't put 15 pounds of pressure. I geek out on this stuff. I'll pull against scales. With a 9 weight, you're going to get maybe 9 pounds of pressure, maybe 12 if you're lucky. You're not going to get 15 pounds of pressure. That's why I don't sweat using 15-pound test. So the improved blood knot, I double over the lighter line, the 15-pound, and I'm going to do like 4 wraps up and 3 wraps down with it. And then 3 wraps with the heavier line around both strands of that 15-pound. Again, wet it really well. Pull it tight. Good looking improved blood knot there. And lots of tag ends on this. So you've got the double line, those tags, the heavy line tag, and I would come back and trim these closer. And then this single tag, all right? Now, here's the thing, something that I do that I don't see a lot of other Louisiana redfish guides do, but actually I find helps and it has saved fish. When I'm pursuing big redfish, I actually tie on a short section of shock tippet. Not because redfish have prominent teeth, they really don't, but because a lot of times I'm fishing over oysters, and that little bit of shock tippet, which I'm just going to use that 40-pound again, helps prevent or helps guard against abrasion from the oysters. Just about a week and a half ago, I was fishing with my buddy Mike and his son Trip, and I was on the front of the boat. I hooked a big fish. The fish ran. I was fighting it, and I did the down and dirty on the fish, pulled back and down, and turned the fish over. When he went nose down, he was on top of a patch of oysters, and he went nose down on top of that patch of oysters, and the oysters abraded the line, and it broke off because I did not have that little piece of shock tippet on there. All I had was my class, which I think I had 20-pound on at that time. So I'm gonna again double the line. I'm gonna do an improved blood knot again. Basically, I use the improved blood knot anytime I'm tying that class tippet to heavier line. And you can see here I'm about shoulder width on it, baby. So again, take that doubled line. Four up. Kind of getting in my own way here. There we go. 3 back. And then 3 with the heavy line. And another good improved blood knot. Get rid of all those tags. And cut that off. And that is one of Ron's turnover leaders for redfish. Again, really heavy butt section, 60-pound. It makes up the majority of the leader. One intermediate section class. and then a shock tippet to guard against the oysters because I'm around oysters all the time, and that has saved many, many fish for me. A lot of times they'll catch fish and get it back, and you'll see a lot of abrasion on that heavier line, enough abrasion that you know that if it was on your class tippet, you'd have lost the fish. So anyway, I hope you found that helpful. It's a very simple leader, but it works very well. People who fish it usually comment on it and say they like how it turns over the fly and such. So give it a shot. If you like what you saw in this video, please like and subscribe. That would help me out a lot. Drop a comment below. I know fly fishermen have strong opinions about leaders, using bubble leaders, whether or not you should use class tippet and everything else. Drop your comments below. I would love to engage that discussion with you in the comments. And I'll see you back here next Monday.